Last question, question number 3. Do you have any advice for finding critique partners? I think about this a lot because people ask me this question pretty often. And again, I was in Alaska this past weekend and I was meeting with, I met with a critique group there. Of, there were like, I think 3 or 4 people who were in a critique group, and they were there, and we had roundtable where we did critiques of first pages, and there was a new writer who sat at my table and did round critiques, and he was a very thoughtful in his critique, and he was then later in some workshops that I ran very thoughtful in the critique. And I just thought to myself, he's going to be a really great critique partner for somebody because of how thoughtful he is in his responses. And I said that to the critique group, hey, if you're looking for somebody else to add to your critique group, scoop that person up. So all that to say is one place to look for critique partners is when you're going to conferences and there are roundtables and critiques like that, and seeing if there's anybody that you match. The biggest thing about finding a critique partner is you can't wait for somebody to come and find you. You are going to have to put yourself out there. And this is pretty difficult for some authors because some authors are very introverted, or they're shy, or they feel uncertain about putting themselves out there. But if you know that you want a critique partner, the best way to find a critique partner is to start asking people. And that is to start asking in the communities that you're in. So whether it's from Written to Recommended, whether it's the Book Boss community, the Success Alliance, or whether it's a Facebook group or something else like that. 2 things. One, you can put up a post and say, hey, I'm looking for a critique partner, and see who responds. Or if there's somebody whose vibe that you really like, you can put yourself out there and say, hey, are you looking for a critique partner? Would you be interested in being a critique partner with me? So both of those things require you to be a little bit vulnerable, which I know is scary. But most people who can't find critique partners because of 2 reasons. One, because they're not putting themselves out there. They're waiting for somebody to come to them. And 2, they're looking in the wrong spaces, meaning they might be a romance writer who's looking in a kind of all general fiction group. So make sure you're also looking in specific spaces where people are writing the same things as you. This is not to say that you have to have critique partners who all write the same things as you, but it is easier to get targeted feedback if somebody is familiar with the genre that you're writing. One of the things that I have heard often throughout my years in publishing from people who are in critique groups that aren't working for them, or there's something that they don't like, is because there's somebody who doesn't understand the romance genre at all. And so when they critique, they don't have helpful advice. They don't, they're not interested. They're like, oh, romance. I don't read this. So I don't know, romance. Or, the same goes for if you're writing science fiction, fantasy, thrillers, domestic suspense, historical fiction, memoirs, biographies. All of those do require some insight into the genre that you're writing. So you do want to have some people who are, if not writing the same thing, at least interested in what you're writing, who have familiarity with the genre, because you're not likely to take advice on a memoir from somebody who's never read a memoir. You're probably not going to take advice on world building your high fantasy from somebody who's never read high fantasy. So there is some kind of, I don't want to say requirement, but you are going to get better critique if it's somebody who has familiarity with the genre that you're writing. Now, that said, you can get, kind of generic writing advice from people, not specific necessarily to the story, but maybe talking about your craft, things like that. So, I mean, it is possible, but finding a critique partner is going to require you to put yourself out there in the right spaces. Now, the next thing that I want to point out, and this is something that I've given in a bonus before, is when you have a critique partner, setting kind of guidelines. I was going to say rules, but guidelines for the critique sessions so that everybody starts from the same place of understanding. So let me give you an example. When I did roundtable critiques this weekend, I go in and I say, okay, here's how this is going to work. whichever of you goes first, you're going to read your sample. The rest of us are going to follow along because we have the page in front of us. We're going to mark it up. I'm going to give you my feedback, and I'm going to give you my feedback from the experience, from the reader's experience, and what I'm seeing from a general market experience. I'm going to give you both critical feedback and positive feedback, and you don't have to take any of my advice, but I'm going to give you what I see or what I'm thinking at the moment. When the rest of you give feedback, what I would like you to do is make sure that your feedback is helpful and not just from a place of, well, I don't really like the word moist, so don't use moist. That's not helpful. Instead, I want you to be giving critical feedback based on how the reader is going to experience the story. And I also want to make sure that you're giving the feedback kindly and constructively. And I want you to make sure that you're giving positive feedback. People who receive the feedback, your job is to be open to the feedback. Make notes, ask questions. Again, you don't have to take any of this feedback, but that's your job. So I'd set up the parameters there. Other parameters I set up are how much time that you have, asking people not to dominate the conversation, asking people to be engaged. So we just set up some really quick parameters when we start the critiques. And I do this very quickly because we don't want to spend a lot of time setting up the parameters. But having the parameters helps people feel comfortable because people are more comfortable when they have a container within which to act. And so when you set up critique partners, when you set up groups, you're going to find it's going to be a more positive experience if you're all on the same page. And that pun was totally unintentional. But you're going to find it's going to be a better experience because there's not going to be as many misunderstandings. There's not going to be as much miscommunication. People are coming at it from the same place and point of view. Everybody with the same understanding of what's expected and how to make this a give and take relationship. So once you've found your critique partner, ask them what they're looking for. You need to know what you're looking for and what your expectations are, and they need to have the same. You need to discuss those before you just dive into critiquing other people's work.